If you missed your favorite show or interview, visit episodes on our website at theworldtoday.news. Our live shows are also on X, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Kick, and Twitch. Now there really is no reason to miss out on anything on theworldtoday.news.
For The World Today, this is James O'Neill. Belgium announced it will deploy soldiers to Brussels to combat escalating drug gang violence, largely tied to North African groups like the Morocco Mafia. Interior Minister Bernard Quinton said the Army's presence would restore public confidence as gangs no longer fear police but still fear soldiers. Mixed police-military patrols will target Brussels and other affected cities, including Antwerp and Ghent. Shootings have surged, with 57 victims this year, while arrests have tripled. Prosecutors urge tougher prison controls and faster deportations. The move mirrors U.S. National Guard deployments in crime hotspots. The FBI and American Bankers Association have warned that AI-generated deepfakes are fueling scams, with losses from fraud exceeding $50 billion since 2020. Criminals increasingly impersonate family members, officials, or celebrities through manipulated video, audio, or images to trick victims into sending money or information. Red flags include blurred facial features, off-sync audio, unnatural voices, or urgent emotional manipulation. Elderly individuals are especially vulnerable to deepfake phishing scams. The global economic impact is expected to reach $40 billion by 2027. Lawmakers have introduced bipartisan legislation to combat AI-enabled fraud and better protect American consumers. Thousands of demonstrators marched through Paris on Saturday, demanding President Emmanuel Macron's resignation and France's withdrawal from the EU. Macron's approval ratings have plunged to record lows amid budget deficits and unpopular austerity plans, with 80% of citizens expressing distrust. Protesters carried Frexit signs and opposed arms deliveries to Ukraine. Prime Minister François Bayrou, facing a no-confidence vote Monday, has proposed major cuts to jobs, pensions, and welfare, which critics say prioritize military spending. Unions plan wider strikes under the slogan "Let's block everything" later this week. Over 300 South Korean workers detained in a massive federal immigration raid at a Hyundai plant in Georgia will be released and repatriated, South Korea announced. The September 4th operation, the largest workplace raid in Homeland Security investigations history, arrested 475 people, mostly South Korean nationals. Video showed agents lining up and shackling detainees. The plant, a Hyundai-LG Energy joint venture to build EV batteries, is one of Georgia's largest economic projects. Workers were sent to a detention center in Folkestone. South Korea expressed concern and regret, sending diplomats to the site. U.S. authorities said the investigation is ongoing with no charges yet filed. Lucy Connolly, British mother jailed for a year over a tweet, announced at Reform UK's annual conference that she plans to work with Nigel Farage's party on justice reform. Introduced as Britain's favorite political prisoner, Connolly described her experience in prison and argued that most female inmates need housing, rehab, and mental health support rather than incarceration. She criticized the judicial backlog and said her harsh sentence was politically motivated after riots linked to a mass stabbing. Reformers suggested passing Lucy's law to allow reviews of unjust sentences. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. spoke about the latest Senate hearing face-off against Democratic lawmakers.
In some cases, millions of dollars from the pharmaceutical industry, so they don't want to hear the answers to the questions that they ask me. They want to make a little speech and then shut me down. But they can't deny the fact that we did worse than COVID, that the CDC is a broken agency. We did worse in COVID than any country in the world. We have 4.2% of the world's population. We have 20% of the world's COVID deaths. We literally we're the worst team in the league.
This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
If you missed your favorite show or interview, visit episodes on our website at theworldtoday.news. Now there really is no reason to miss out on anything on theworldtoday.news.
Yep, the world really is going nuts, isn't it? I mean, look at the US with the vaccines. I mean, it's just absolutely crazy. And it all gets down to telling the truth. They don't want you to have a decision on your body. I'm going to play this video. This is an interview from Scott Gottlieb. He appeared on the Squawk Box, I think it's called. Let me find it. Yeah, on the Squawk Box, to discuss the debate which is just raging at the moment, to discuss the debate around vaccine safety. Cam, if you could play that clip.
Joining us right now to talk about what we're seeing in Washington, covering Health and Human Services, is Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He is the former FDA commissioner and a CNBC contributor who's also an Illumina and Pfizer board member. And Dr. Gottlieb, I want to talk to you a little bit today about what we saw last week in the hearings with RFK Jr. This was interesting because there were a lot of Republican senators who are really raising questions about the tactics that he's taking at this point. And I went through and was kind of watching some of these. Senator Barrasso from Wyoming is the second-ranking Republican in the Senate. He's also a doctor, and here's what he had to say on this. He had some comments. In fact, let's listen in. Republican senators expressing some dismay at Senator Kennedy's words at last week's hearings in front of the Finance Committee. We've heard from Senators Barrasso and Tillis in the hearing, and in fact, here's what they both had to say.
Secretary Kennedy, in your confirmation hearings, you promised to uphold the highest standards for vaccines. Since then, I've grown deeply concerned.
I do also believe that some of your statements seem to contradict what you said in the prior hearing. You said you're going to empower the scientists at HHS to do their job. I'd just like to see evidence where you've done that.
Senator Mike Rounds of South Dakota, for his part, told reporters, I'm telling my kids, I'm telling my family members and anybody who asks my opinion, get your vaccines. They have saved millions of lives. And when he was asked if he had second thoughts about voting to confirm Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as Health and Human Services Secretary, Rounds said, I think the president wanted him, and I think the president has to deal with him. That's a lot of voices, Dr. Gottlieb, who are now raising questions on the Republican side. And I just wonder how much tolerance the president, you think, will have for an agenda that may not necessarily reflect his own.
Yeah, look, I think the president seems to be supportive of Kennedy. I think what you're seeing on the Hill is mounting frustration around the moves on the pediatric vaccine schedule. I think a lot of people who had frustrations coming out of COVID about both the mandates as well as the disclosures of information around that vaccine, where people felt that the CDC was slow to service certain information, wanted some kind of reckoning, but they didn't want a reckoning around the pediatric vaccine schedule, which is what RFK seems to be after right now. I think a lot of the policy steps he's taken is setting up an outcome where he's going to try to restrict access to the pediatric vaccines. You're seeing on the Hill, there's not a lot of tolerance for that. And you heard the president's comments as well, affirming the importance of that pediatric schedule.
The president's comments, I think you're referring to when he was talking about Florida, where there is a movement afoot to say that there are no more mandatory vaccines, including for kids going to school. The president himself said, and I'm just looking for this at this point, you have some vaccines that are so incredible. He said this at the White House when he was asked about that effort in Florida. And I think you have to be very careful when you say that some people don't have to be vaccinated. I think you're right. There were a lot of questions about the COVID vaccine, people wondering how safe, especially for kids. Some questions, just going back, this was something that was done in a rush. Can we ask some of those questions without upending every vaccine that we've ever developed and put forward?
Yeah, look, and the president's comments reflect my conversations with him. I had many opportunities to talk to the president about vaccines, probably 6 in all, which is a lot of conversations for an FDA commissioner to be having with the president. He had good questions. He had some furtive concerns. He wanted to make sure we were looking at the data. He wanted to make sure we have good systems in place to monitor the safety of vaccines. Some of his questions were around the purported link between autism and the MMR vaccine, because there was a lot of stuff in the press. But the president always affirmed the importance of the pediatric schedule. And a few times that he went out and spoke publicly about this forcefully, it was always to encourage people to get vaccinated. During the 2019 outbreak of measles in New York City in the Orthodox community, the president went out and said it was very important for children to get that vaccine. During the 2018 flu season, when we had a very bad flu season, he went out and tried to encourage senior citizens to get vaccinated. So the president was always supportive. He had good questions. They were the kind of questions you would encounter with, a parent. But they were not the kinds of questions we're seeing raised by Secretary Kennedy. And I think Kennedy's at odds with both the president's ethos around these things and certainly members of the Senate.
What questions is Kennedy raising that are different, you think, than what President Trump raised?
Well, it's not the questions he's raising. It's the instruments he's putting in place to start restricting access to vaccines, getting control of the ACIP committee at CDC. He's going to put on the next agenda the hepatitis B vaccine. We all know He's looking at MMRV vaccine, trying to obviate use of the MMRV vaccine, which is measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella. I believe he's going to claim in his autism report that there's an association between alum, which is the adjuvant used in most pediatric vaccines, and autism, which is going to set in place a litigation enterprise against the vaccines to potentially bankrupt the vaccine injury compensation program. So that could take down the whole pediatric vaccine enterprise. And he's been very systematic, very methodical, frankly, very effective, putting in place the people and the tools he needs to try to effectuate this goal. Look, he is an avowed anti-vaxxer. He spent 2 decades doing this. Sometimes you have to take people at their word. I think this is a mission of his, and there really hasn't been a lot of pushback until now, and this is mostly rhetorical pushback. No one's really stopped him from implementing these instruments of control.
When you say bring down the entire pediatric vaccine schedule, what do you mean?
Well, look, if he makes a move to say that there is a purported link between alum and the entire pediatric schedule, that adjuvant's used in about 10 vaccines is no good alternative. He could force the vaccine manufacturers to try to reformulate the vaccines, decouple them. So instead of having MMR, you have measles, mumps, and rubella separately. Remember, we're in a situation right now, we're seeing declining vaccination rates. Last year, we had 35,000 cases of pertussis. The year before, it was 5,000. This year, we're expecting upwards of 75,000. So you're starting to see the vaccination rates declining, and you're starting to see the implications of that in terms of more disease. I think he's going to systematically go after, try to force manufacturers to reformulate and decouple some of these vaccines. One of the things they did in the COVID approval that was interesting was a contraindicated co-administration between the COVID vaccine and flu and RSV. And as you know, I'm on the board of Pfizer.
Right.
There's a lot of data showing that COVID could be safely administered with flu. In fact, the CDC website still recommends that. They created a new evidentiary standard they called substantial clinical benefit. They're saying you have to prove substantial clinical benefit in order to demonstrate that 2 vaccines can be co-administered. They did this in the context of COVID. If you extend this, not to an extreme, but just to sort of its logical next step, why wouldn't they call into question co-administration of the pediatric schedule and say you have to demonstrate that there's substantial benefit to co-administering these? If they did that...
There's a substantial benefit if you're a parent because you don't want your kid to get jabbed 4 times instead of 1 for the MMRV.
A lot of what we do with the pediatric schedule is to try to conform with practice of pediatrics because you can only bring a baby back so many times for a well baby visit. If they start to decouple these things and force a lot of more interactions with the healthcare system, it's going to put pressure on vaccination rates overall. Right. You want to get them over with, but it's going to cause a lot of people not to get those vaccines. Them at all. Yeah, they'll be lost to follow-up.
Scott, you bring up, you're on the board at Pfizer. Critics are going to say, oh, you're just saying this because you're defending Pfizer and defending their vaccine business. What's your response to that?
Well, look, a lot of what we're talking about here is not made by Pfizer. The only pediatric vaccine that Pfizer makes is the pneumonia vaccine. So if you look at alum, for example, it's in Hib, it's in meningitis, it's in hepatitis B, it's in a lot of other vaccines. It's not in that the Pfizer particular vaccines. Pfizer does make the COVID vaccine, but I think, frankly, we've kind of settled in an environment right now where that vaccine is largely going to be used by an older population. My biggest concern are the pediatric vaccines, MMR, pertussis, DTaP. That's what I think Kennedy's focusing on.
And for the Republicans who are raising questions, and again, it's also been Senator Cassidy from Louisiana, a Republican, who's a doctor, and Barrasso, who is not only the second-ranking Republican in the Senate, but a doctor. With them raising questions, does that change the stakes?
I don't think it changes the stakes a whole lot, quite frankly. I think this really needs to be from the White House, and the question is, where is the president on a lot of these things? It certainly puts pressure on the secretary. I think potentially it slows them down a little bit, makes them think twice about doing things like firing the CDC director, things that are very visible. But a lot of what's happening that's going to be most impactful is this stuff underneath the radar, what I'm talking about now, the alum, and declaring that it's the cause of autism.
I was just going to ask you, politically, do you think that RFK is going to remain in this job for the duration of Trump's term?
I think he's going to remain in the job as long as he wants, quite frankly. I don't see any real groundswell in the White House from what I'm hearing that RFK, is an albatross around the administration, needs to leave.
Except that I don't think that they like some of the vaccine, except that they seem to be at odds on some of the vaccine stuff a little bit, but maybe they're really not at odds.
Yeah, but so look at talc. So FDA held panels on talc trying to link talc to certain chronic diseases. They backed off that immediately because a lot of manufacturers went to the White House with concerns, and the White House, I think, encouraged RFK and others to back away from that. And it wasn't just the drug companies. These were cosmetic manufacturers. You could see situations where there's pressure to back off certain of these vectors. I think the vaccines, though, is so part and parcel to the Secretary's ethos. I have a hard time believing he's going to back away from there. And the other thing is that, that hearing was combative. But I think a lot of people go into hearings right now in this administration of the view that they do better when they're combative. I think he overreached a little. I think he overreached a little bit because I think showing disrespect, particularly to any member of Congress, but especially your own party, is risky. But that is the general posture of people who go before the Senate. Unfortunately, right now, that they feel that they need to be combative if they're going to be facing, a hostile hearing.
Ew. I feel like I've, because I'm listening to this guy. Ew. Awful, isn't it? This is the likes of MSNBC, CBS, ABC, NBC. In Australia, the ABC. Look at the BBC. It just makes me feel dirty. It's anyway. That was Scott Gottlieb, who's he's on the Visor board. Of course, he's going to say nice things about it. It doesn't tell you, though, that all that RFK Jr. wants is data. Oh, what do you want that for? Absolutely incredible. We're going to bring in our next guest once he's done some work around his window, because he's making he's becoming a good lighting guy, I would think. So he's getting himself organised. Our guest to comment on Scott Gottlieb and the attempted coup on RFK Jr. Well, it's in full swing. Our guest is Paul D. Thacker, investigative journalist, former investigator, United States Senate, former fellow SAFRA Ethics Center, Harvard University, and he also runs the Disinformation Chronicles Substack, which we'll talk more about later too, and find out where you can go for that. Paul, thanks for joining us. You've done a great job with the window, by the way. I could see all that you were doing, and I was going to be mean and put the camera on you, but I thought I won't do that. It wasn't a good view. Yeah. But what you were doing, at least you could fix it. What they're trying to do to RFK Jr. and Scott Gottlieb, I feel like when you shake hands with someone who's sweaty and all, and you go, wow, that's what I feel like listening to this guy. And truly, I mean, and the pawning over from the host, oh, we love you. Guess who probably pays most of their wages?
Right.
I mean, as simple as that. Do you think the coup, because they are going to try and oust him because he's upset a few noses, and good on him, because he's doing what has been needed for decades. Do you think it'll succeed?
From what I can see right now, I mean, look, this is a very tempestuous White House. You don't know what you're going to wake up to at times. But so far, what we can see is that, RFK Jr. And Trump are, they're in sync right now. Gottlieb's been doing Gottlieb since, decades now. He's always been very much pro-industry. He actually started out on Wall Street before he ended up going to medical school. So his focus has always been on how can, people make money off of pharmaceuticals, not so much how can pharmaceuticals, help people. That's always been his interest, is, making money off this stuff. And, then he goes on CNBC, and, they're making money off the advertising. He's there representing the American Enterprise Institute, which takes money from pharma. There was a huge scandal with them. They were, AEI, where he's at as a senior fellow now, since he's left as, he's always called former FDA commissioner. Every pharma website loves to call him former FDA commissioner. They don't tell you he's at the American Enterprise Institute, which was caught up in a scandal. They were taking hundreds of thousands of dollars from Purdue Pharma and then promoting opioids and telling you that, the opioids aren't bad for you and that they're not addictive. He's also, as an advisor, Scott is also an advisor to a massive, a hedge fund or some type of investment vehicle that invests everything in healthcare. So this is all a money dance. And Scott's also a little upset because I've been told he's been trying to get back inside the administration. He was Trump's first FDA pick, and was then he got pushed out for whatever reason. It never really came to light. But he's upset. He's trying to get back in. He's on the outside yelling, and he's doing that. He's doing that for Wall Street. He's not doing that for people in public health.
He seems to be under the illusion that Trump is on side with the industry. He may have been leaning that way until, as Navarro says, that Navarro was furious. He said that Trump was misled on the side effects. Is this vaccine good? Yes, Mr. President, it's really great. Any side effects? No, Mr. President, none.
Yeah.
There are enormous side effects. And if you look at Trump, he doesn't forget, and he just gets even. Could you quite possibly see, on behalf of the American people, in the next 12 months or thereabouts, that he actually sues Pfizer and all the other vaccine manufacturers for blatantly hiding all the data?
I don't think that's what's going to happen. We've got another vehicle moving here. The FDA commissioner just announced that they're going to be looking at and coming out with an announcement on how many children were actually killed by and harmed by the COVID vaccines. I think the way to look at this is, we were in a really tricky point in 2020. We had to go all the way back to 2020. And, they put together and slammed together very quickly this mission that they called Operation Warp Speed, which is to get out a vaccine as quickly as possible. And remember, people forget this, but coming into the election in 2020, so when we hit November, Kamala Harris started calling this the Trump vaccine. Like, I'm not going to get the Trump vaccine. As soon as Trump was out, they embraced the vaccine. They wanted everyone to get a vaccine. They pushed for mandates. Everyone needed to get the vaccine. So everything around this vaccine was political from the beginning. But the one thing that, and what the Biden administration did is, as more and more evidence came out that, this vaccine, wasn't really stopping transmission, there were serious side effects, they just began ignoring it. They were never interested in trying to understand, how bad the side effects were and trying to explore that. They were never really interested in, they went out and there are those famous videos floating around where Fauci, the CDC director, Rochelle Walensky, were all saying that the vaccine was stopping transmission, and everyone knew it wasn't, and they were lying to us then. But if we go back and look, I wrote a story for the Daily Beast back in 2020 about Operation Warp Speed, and what it's about is because the guy that they put in charge of this is a guy named Moncef Slaoui, who was the former head of research at GlaxoSmithKline. That's who was put in charge of Operation Warp Speed. And that guy has a very tattered history. He was in charge of research at Glaxo back in 2007 when I was in the United States Senate and investigating corruption in the pharmaceutical industry. And this drug killed, or we don't know how many it killed, but it certainly caused tens of thousands of heart attacks and cardiovascular problems. Also in the UK, there was a lawsuit brought forward by patients in the UK that Glaxo ended up killing off. This was reported in The Guardian. And this drug, after it came out that there was problems with it, we released the emails. It took me almost 2.5 years to get through all the emails, and we released a U.S. Senate Finance report. And what we found is that, Glaxo knew that the drug was bad, and Slaoui himself, head of research at GlaxoSmithKline, said, oh my God, not only is it causing increased risk of cardiovascular events, it's causing increase of cardiovascular death. This is an email that he said, right? He then, a couple months later, right? So we're talking about March, I can't remember what the time span we're talking about in 2007. But then a few months later, he goes in front of the House, in front of an investigative committee, and just washes it all away and says, no, this drug is fine. This drug is everything. When we released these emails years afterwards, Glaxo freaked out. And a friend of mine at the Wall Street Journal told me that they began hiding him in Europe. They didn't want him to come back to the United States because they were worried he's going to be prosecuted for lying to Congress. And then this guy suddenly gets coughed up by the biomedical industry to run Operation Warp Speed. Now, I know because I talked to one of the guys in the White House just last year, and I asked him, when you guys picked him, did you realize the scandal he'd been involved in, that he lied about this drug, which we know killed a lot of Americans. He said, we knew nothing about that. So the whole thing from the beginning was being run by a corrupt actor in the pharmaceutical industry from the very beginning. And I think once Trump, people start talking about how bad this thing was, how he was misled from the beginning, I think he's going to listen. And that's what they're worried about. That's what they're terrified of. That's what Scott Gottlieb is scared of, is the fact that the president might suddenly think the way most Americans do, which is that we don't trust the drug industry. Surprise. Like, why would we do that? Because they have a history of lying to us.
What about these doctors? Because and it's still going on. I mean, look at Australia. Look at Washington State. The mandating that children still got to get the shot, even without parental consent or notification, which is just terrible. Right. But even in Australia, they're still pushing the vaccine. It's great. It's fantastic. Right. Don't watch any long mini series, but it's really good. You'll last at least a minute. Because they don't talk about myocarditis and all the other things. They look at cancers now for young people. They're on the up and up. Do you think it's so unethical that here we have the doctors? Oh yeah, this is good for you. The cash register next door, ka-ching, ka-ching. This is good for you. Get your shot now. But we don't have a shot. We're not going to take this shot or the booster. Right. And part two of that, just thought of it then. If you have to keep getting a booster, guess what? It doesn't work.
Right. Well, I mean, what's going on right now, I just did an interview. I released an interview with a woman who's a doctor up in New York. So New York just came out with the governor of New York, Kathy Hochul, signed, believe it or not, an emergency order so that they can start prescribing these vaccines off-label. So they actually provided step-by-step instructions so that you can go to your pharmacist in New York and you can get it off-label. So they have to ask you, you have to sign a patient consent form, I believe. There's a whole step-by-step instructions. And when you look at all the papers together, so you look at like what they have for kids, what they have for adults, and they have what they call it pregnant people. It's this politicized language to be trans inclusive. So it's not pregnant women, it's pregnant people. Basically what they're going to be doing in New York is they're going to be vaccinating everyone. So the only one who they're not basically pushing to get vaccinated in the state of New York are infants below the age of 6 months. This is just so insane because you're putting doctors in a position in which, and because of the way how aggressively they're going after doctors who raise questions about these about these vaccines, you're going to have a doctor who has a patient come in, right, and is going to say, I want to get my 5-year-old vaccinated with the COVID vax. That doctor is not going to be able to disclose to that patient, well, I just want to let you know, I'm not getting my little children vaccinated, nor are any of my colleagues getting little children vaccinated, because that could end up with a complaint to the licensing board. So that's the kind of situation we have now in states like New York, where they've completely just lost the narrative. I mean, it's so crazy. One of the things they had on there as a condition that might cause you to get severe COVID-19, according to the Department of Health of New York, is physical activity. Exercise, I guess. I have no clue like what they're thinking, if this is a mess up or no one knows what they're doing up there.
Mm. Tell me this, the West Coast Alliance, which is all these evil doctors and politicians, they're going against the CDC's recommendations on COVID-19 vaccine. If you were a fly on the wall, do you think Donald Trump is walking on the ceiling at the moment and putting little pins in these little dolls that look like all the people there?
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I mean, if you just think about it, like this is really showing you like how extreme things have gotten inside the United States. So what they're doing is they're upset now that the label from the FDA does not recommend anyone get the COVID vaccine unless you're 64 years or older, or if you've got some sort of, I believe what it is comorbidity. I'm pretty sure that's what the label says at this time. So if you've got increased risk, if you've got, diabetes or, some other kind of issue that puts you at increased risk of getting sick. And what they're doing by sort of coming together and, going against that, against like the basic medical evidence is they're going to have people internally who are looking at this and be like, what the hell is my government doing? What is my governor doing? Like, what is my state Department of Health doing? And I can't help but think that this is going to drive more people away from the Democratic Party. I mean, this is just me just guessing. I have no clue at all. But I mean, just from what my discussions with a physician in New York, I mean, when you see a governor pushing for something, right, a medical intervention that only 15% of doctors themselves are getting for themselves, kind of tells you something. Kind of tells you something that this is a government that is a little bit out of control.
And yeah, I think so. But I think also it's, I always, when Trump got into power, we were mortified because we thought, what's there to talk about? Man, oh man, how wrong we were. Where do you see these recent developments heading? Will there be a face-off with the pharma industry, or do you think they'll find a way to do business?
I mean, the one thing that initially struck me as soon as I saw this is I am incredibly suspicious about all this. The drug companies are not allowed to do what's called off-label marketing, right? So the label right now, if I have it correct, it says if you're 64 years or older, or if you've got some kind of increased risk and you're an adult, right? I mean, that's kind of what the label at this time says. And what they're pushing now is like to basically go off that label so that basically everyone can get it. They can go in and ask for it, right? Now, drug companies can't do that. Drug companies cannot promote a product off label. And in 2009, Pfizer paid a fine of $2.3 billion, right? I think the thing you have to put this in perspective, until we had the Gulf of Mexico oil spill, right, where BP just like dumped all this oil into the middle of our Gulf, the industry that had paid the most in fines to the United States federal government in the history of our nation was the pharmaceutical industry. And this $2.3 billion fine by Pfizer in 2009, that was a historical high, right? And that was for off-label promotion of several drugs that they were doing. So I don't believe there's anything on the books that disallows state officials from doing this, right? But if the drug companies are in the governor's offices, right? If they're secretly behind the scenes, lobbying state legislatures for them to promote this stuff off label, my guess is that's illegal. Because I mean, first off, you have to understand, like, I've never heard of let's put it in perspective. I've never heard of a state government promoting a product off label. This is unprecedented from what I understand, right? But if the companies are behind the scenes pushing this themselves so that they're then promoting these drugs by proxy off label, my guess is that they face legal liability from the United States federal government. If I worked for the Inspector General at Health and Human Services, I would be sending out subpoenas to all these governors, to all these states' legislatures, and I'd be asking to see all their emails and all their communications with the drug industry. That's what I'd be doing.
Good luck on a quick reply.
Yeah, well,
maybe not. Where's a faraway island we can hide? Look, it's been a pleasure chatting. I would love to see what's going to happen in the next few days with Robert Kennedy Jr. I see that Ron Johnson has been doing a fantastic job standing up for him, and I have a lot of admiration for Ron Johnson. If somebody wants to find out more about you, Paul, how do they do that?
You can find me on X at Thacker PD. And then you can also, if you just Google the Disinformation Chronicle, you can find my newsletter there.
Thank you very much. We've got to do this more often. I enjoy that. And your handiwork. I mean,
thank you.
It's Paul the tool man.
It's getting me right here.
I can see it. No, it's your halo. Look, no, it's not your halo. Far from it. Paul D. Thacker, thank you very much. Thank you. This is The World Today.
A hoax about carbon dioxide in the climate has caused a global energy and economic disaster. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
Dr. Frank Romano is on a boat heading towards Gaza. Just recently, in the last few hours, the lead boat, it was called the Tunisia. That's right. No, it wasn't near Tunisia. Anyway, the lead boat of the Sumud flotilla vessel, it was hit by a drone. The drone hit this boat, and apparently at this stage, no casualties. Frank sent us a quick video, so we'll play that. Cam, can you play drone?
I have heard some unsettling news. I just arrived in Tunis from the boat Pelucho Decimo, which is right near the family boat. And then I just heard, about a half hour ago, that the family boat, the leading boat in the global Sumud flotilla, has been attacked. A drone apparently was hovering by and dropped a bomb on it and caused a fire. And this is the second time recently that drones, even though it hasn't been proven, most likely Israeli drones have attacked a humanitarian vessel headed for Gaza. The first time was in recent history anyway. The Conscience in Malta. I was there with many other activists 6 hours away from boarding the boat when the boat was bombed by 2 drones and incapacitated, so we were not able to board the boat and head for Gaza with important humanitarian aid. We weren't able to break the siege. We were stopped in Malta. Now in Tunis, the family boat, the flagship boat for our flotilla, with my friends Thiago, Yasmin, and others, and Sueb and others are on that boat, or were on that boat. Unfortunately, most people were off the boat, getting showers and stuff in hotels in Tunis when the boat was bombed. And this is another civilian boat bomb that is carrying humanitarian aid to help that's trying to break the siege of the illegal siege of Gaza that has been attacked. This is just reporting, and then there'll be more updates later. Apparently the fire has been put out, but apparently some of the boats might be evacuated. But this should not stop us from sailing to Gaza with this important aid to break the siege and to inspire other activists to do the same, which is what's needed to stop Israel and the United States from implementing this terrible genocide taking place in Gaza before our eyes, when the world is doing almost nothing about it. But we are, and we will inspire others to have a massive number of boats to follow. By sea and by land, we will force Israel and the United States to open up the gates of humanitarian aid and withdraw from Gaza.
So there you are. There's Dr. Frank Romano, magnificent person, by the way. Joachim Hagopian, who's an independent journo. Just before we get into 9/11, can you just give us your thoughts on that? The boat and the flotilla, the boat was family. They're in Tunisian waters. I mean, what gives Israel the right to bomb a boat in Tunisian waters?
It has to violate all international law, of course. But even more than that, this is a violation of God's moral law. These people are humanitarian, loving people that are trying to help people that are in dire need, obviously dying every day, starvation, many of them, children and women, most of them. And so for Israel to go out, I mean, they know how to get the whole world to hate them because that's what they're doing. Every action like this only makes what they would call anti-Semitism. People that don't like what's going on, which is, all moral compasses lead to saying this is horrible. This is a condemnation of God's laws. But they want to go out apparently as demons. So certainly the government of Israel, they are demons. And the government of America are demons, because without American government, it wouldn't be happening. So yeah, you can blame them. The whole world is becoming, they detest what's going on with America government and Israel government. And obviously, bombing this flotilla, I mean, unbelievable. They crash every limit of decency and don't care because they get away with it all the time. We have to stop them. Otherwise, they're going to try and get World War III going. That's what Netanyahu's game is all about. Get America involved in World War III in the Middle East.
I'm just I'm appalled and intrigued that the international outrage from governments around the world. Have you seen any? I haven't seen anything.
Very lukewarm. You have France, I think, the latest saying, okay, we're going to recognize Palestine in September when we readjourn at the UN. I mean, it's just, it's very empty, very empty. The only group is from Yemen that's really going active on resistance with drones and occasional missiles inside to Israel. They're
Yeah.
the only group, though, that is there's a consequence for the evil that Israel's doing. Well, they're the only group other than Hamas and but
Mm.
that's it. That's it.
But
Iran does not want to start nuclear war, so they're staying out of it. The only times they will go against Israel is when they are attacked first. So they're taking the defensive posture, and for good reason. You can't blame them. They don't want World War III. They don't want nuclear wipeout. So yeah, they have to be restraining. But I hold America, the government, I hold them the most responsible because it would have never happened without their aid and support. So yeah.
I just haven't. I mean, I just think if they had killed people, and it was just by sheer good fortune, because as Frank said in that video, they were off the boat having showers and whatever. If they had been on the boat, there would have been mass casualties. I mean, this is an attack in Tunisian waters, but it's way out of the borders of this whole conflict.
Yeah, yeah. Like I say, it violates every international law, much less the humanitarian and morality laws. So yeah, it's just despicable what Netanyahu's government has been doing. It's just it's like a misbehaving child that will not stop until the higher authority, usually a parent, an adult, will force them to stop. Well, so far there's no real adult in the international room that has the courage or the strength to stop Israel, and that's just a sad statement for today's world.
Um, the It's the 9th here, but tomorrow it's the 9th in the US, which is remembering 9/11. That's where government would tell us that planes flew into two very tall buildings. They created this heat which has never been done before, that actually melted the steel of this very tall building. Yet on the outside and above, one floor up, people were seen waving from this catastrophe, and they weren't burnt at all. But right below them was this very, very hot flame. This is what government tells us, that was melting the infrastructure. And then you have the plane that crashed into the Pentagon. Unfortunately, they haven't found any bits of it yet. And if it was coming in that low, at the height they said it was, a couple of things: the engines would have hit the ground first of all, so it wouldn't have reached. And secondly, as we were, I forgot his name, Richard Gage said the other day, here we have a guy that failed flying a Cessna. He couldn't pass that test. He did this magnificent loop down, and smack bang into the Pentagon. So all these things, which I believe are all lies. And unfortunately also the Pentagon, there was an investigation into where so many trillion disappeared. It just disappeared. Anyway, all the records disappeared too with that that plane that happened to crash into the Pentagon. Tell us your thoughts about this, and have there been any new developments?
Well, more of it's coming out. It's interesting. We just left the horrible story of Israel and the U.S. government. Well, this is an inside job by Israel and traders in the U.S. government. Uh, they're the whole architects of 911. It has nothing to do with a ragtag unit of terrorists that were given flying lessons, basically, under the eye of the FBI. They knew everything was planned way in advance. So the bottom line is the group that came into power, run really by Dick Cheney, the vice president, not George W., who doesn't have quite the IQ for the job. And it was a stolen election, too, by the way, that got him in there twice. Uh, anyway, it was planned from the very beginning, years in advance. They did a 1993 bombing of the same buildings, and they blamed the terrorists then, too, 1993. So, yeah. Then we have these planes, four of them supposedly involved, and two of them were not even scheduled to be in the air. They were not in the air that day. And then the two that were did not end up, flying into the Twin Towers or the Pentagon building. That was a total lie. There's so many lies stacked up, one after the other, with 911. But it was a missile. It was in the Pentagon. So I mean, the lies just go on and on. So Cheney was basically the executive in charge. George W. was out in the school, with the little kids. They give him that job, while Dick Cheney ran the show. And he basically called all the air defense, Navy and Air Force. They weren't flying that day. And the Osama bin Laden family were visiting George H.W. in a hotel in Washington. They were dining for breakfast there while it went on. I mean, there are so many things about this. First of all, physics, the law of physics doesn't mean that you can have the gravity just take them down up here and then the whole thing vaporizes, including the huge beams. Everything vaporizes. That was a nuclear weapon used, a tactical nuclear weapon that they brought that down. And there's all this evidence. And then you have the dancing Israelis rejoicing because they had actually done a lot of the inside work in the buildings that went down. And then they were on film later and on news. They were being they ran back. Well, they had to do about 43 days because the police found them dancing and they brought them in and they kept them for 43 days. But because it's an inside job with America and Israel, they released them and they went back and they did a news program and they were basically saying, we're there to film it. Meaning that they had foreknowledge of the event, So there's so many holes in the whole bullshit that went down with the investigation. It's completely false. There's so many holes. And people like the engineer architects and my friend James Spetzer, these guys have just totally exposed the whole falsehood of that story.
But 3,600 architects said, but what would they know? Said that can't fall down. But what was miraculous though, it was that building number 7, it fell down, just fell down, just like that. Do you think magic was part of this? Because
no plane hit that building.
it just fell down. Oh, must have been. And part of the tenants of that building were the IRS and I think some other intel orgs. But there was no one in there. And a gentleman went up there, I think, was it Rudy Giuliani or someone went up there to a meeting and there was nobody there, so he got down very quickly. But as he was running down, he could hear explosions. Now, don't forget, this building, it wasn't hit. It just boom, 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 collapsed. So it's pretty wild to say the least. Do you think?
Well, let me just get this in. That building 7, the BBC announcer was saying it's gone, and there's right now over her shoulder. I mean, so many things. You know,
Yeah.
it's a horrible, horrible, cruel joke on the world.
But doesn't I mean, here's the thing though, because that alone shows you that it was a planned demolition, and some say because of the asbestos bill that was coming into operation, and that the people that owned that building would have been bankrupted. But to have major news orgs saying it's falling down, maybe not. They would also have to be part of the whole scenario, the whole crime, wouldn't they?
Oh, yeah. Well, really, it's all about Israel and the greater Israel project. Israel wants to take over the Middle East and be the only regional power there. And so they get America to fight wars. And how do you get America to fight wars in the Middle East for the greater Israel project? You do a new Pearl Harbor. You know, that's there's an organization that actually thought this up prior to the event. They actually called for a new Pearl Harbor. That was Dick Cheney and Wolfowitz and Rumsfeld, that whole group. They called for a new Pearl Harbor. So yeah, and then a couple of weeks after 9/11, we have General Wesley Clark up in the Pentagon, and they ended up revealing that the United States government, this is after they passed the Patriot Act, even before the event. But the United States government they have the plan. They're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years. Well, they've taken them all out except Iran. So they're still going after Iran. But that's what this whole thing was about. And, the architects really behind it was Netanyahu and Israel.
Retired firefighters, including there's one here in Queensland, a friend of us, Peter Campion, who was a fire inspector. He also says that it could not happen. The steel structures, these firefighters have noted that these steel structures could not melt. Tucker Carlson, other journos, and now some senators are now believers in the conspiracy. Do you think this will change anything? Because if we need to do something, you're more than likely going to have Donald Trump as part of that team who says this was impossible to have happened the way we've been told. We need to have an investigation to investigate all these plane crashes, all these buildings falling down, all the people that died, and you mentioned Cheney, but there's others too who are still alive. These people need to be held accountable. Do you think Trump will have the gonads to initiate a new investigation?
Ironically, on the very day that 9/11 happened, he was interviewed because he's actually had hired some of the engineers that were involved in this. Mm-hmm. And he was basically calling it out at that time, saying this couldn't have happened. So I mean, I give him that, but the Donald Trump today is not the Donald Trump even a few years ago. Literally, they have clones for these people. Biden, all of them have clones. Hillary, all of them. So I'm not so sure that the one that's quote in the White House right now is the same person. But anyway, all you have to do is check heights, and there's big difference between the one in there now. But anyway, no, I don't have faith in Donald Trump. This is a guy that was supposed to, come out with the Epstein files. He had no problem with that. And then all the people in his regime were, oh, yeah, we're going to do it. We're going to do it. And then, oh, no, there wasn't anybody. It was just Ghislaine and Jeffrey. That's it. We have nobody else. No. I mean, yeah. So I can't really, expect Donald Trump, who's covering up so much for his own, survival, basically politically and every other way too, because I believe he was a pedophile. There's plenty of evidence there. Anyway, yeah, no, I don't believe that Trump's going to come out with it. I don't believe it.
So in our lifetime, because we've got most likely J.D. Vance, unless something really bad happens, he'll be the next president of the US. He'll be there for 4 years, 8 years probably. And then you may get some of the Democrats in. In our lifetime, it's most likely we'll never know. We do know the story and the truth, but it will never be made public, will it?
No, it requires a change in the personnel that runs the world, the controllers that have all the government puppets under control. We have to get rid of the people at the top of this power structure that runs the earth. And unless we do that, no, none of this is going to come out.
And at this stage, we have the world is becoming smaller and smaller. We always say that, but it is. You got Elon Musk. I think he's got 41. He's putting up another 20 or 30 or 40,000 satellites, and then you have Bill Gates, who's going to also put up 61,000 satellites, so he can watch every square inch of the planet, and with facial recognition and also all the biometrics and stuff, he will know. The government will know, and also Plantier has the facilities that you will have total obliteration of privacy and your own individual rights globally, and that's coming up. So we might have other things to worry about besides finding out who actually did those, which we know. We know it was the Israelis, and we know they went into partnership with the US government to kill their own people, and that's the bottom line. They killed their own people, because these things do not collapse just like that. Joachim, if someone wants to find out more about you and do some great reading, how do they do that?
Find all my articles on thegovernmentrag.com, jamesjfetcher.org, and theinteldrop.org. And you can find every chapter of my 5 books on pedophilia and empire on pedoempire.org. I also do a couple of Revolution Radio programs each week.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely brilliant. Your insight is second to none. Have a great, at the moment would be about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Am I right, or am I 1 hour out?
Yeah, you're right on the button.
There for dancing. That's what my dad used to say, but I never learnt the difference. Have a great afternoon. We'll catch you again, hopefully next week. Joachim Hagopian, independent journalist, and his knowledge and insight is second to none, and appreciate your time very much. This is The World Today.